Well, hello and welcome to anyone who is joining us live today on the Growth Accelerator. For anyone who's new around here, I am Marina Cull. I am the head of marketing here at Incendium. And today we're very excited to have Melissa Rosenthal with us. For anyone who's unfamiliar with Melissa, she is the co-founder at Outlever, but also has a quite impressive string of different experiences at the executive level at ClickUp, Cheddar, Buzzfeed, just to name a few. So very excited to have you on with us, Melissa, today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, I think why don't you start by just introducing Outlever? Because the idea of Outlever kind of will help frame up a lot of our conversation and some of the things that I'm interested to dig in with you for today. So I'd love to hear just your brief overview of what the company does, but also kind of what sparked your interest in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, as you mentioned, Marina, is primarily on the media news side, where I was very early at Buzzfeed, and then I went to go help start a company called Cheddar, which was a live streaming media news network, mostly focused on financial and tech content. And during that time, we were really building an editorial voice and authority to sell to mostly B2B advertisers. And then fast forward, going over to hypergrowth B2B SaaS, I found that it was very hard to have the conversations and also build the authority that we were able to build sort of on the editorial side of the news companies that I helmed. And the idea behind Outlever is sort of a culmination of all of that. What if companies, B2B or B2C, could really just own the narrative that they wanted to own and market anyway? What if they could build that authority from day one? What if there wasn't a middleman between them and the voice that they wanted to actually surround themselves with? And what if that became an asset that only increased in value over time, having the right conversations with their prospect customers, prospect buyers, subject matter experts daily, 24/7. So really it's kind of removing that middleman and rethinking what thought leadership is, rethinking what journalism is this day and age, and really giving companies the ability to own their own narrative 24/7.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting idea. I know when our CEO Nate mentioned it to me, like it was something I had never even considered. It's definitely a little bit outside of the box. And I'm curious for you, like how I guess how did that kind of evolve as far as an alternative form of marketing, right? Like marketing, I think, used to exist in this box that was like very tangible, very straightforward. You go out, you call people, maybe market on social media and stuff. So what was the evolution for you of like, we got to get beyond this?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's definitely it's very interesting time in marketing, and it kind of makes sense for this to kind of come to fruition during this time. I think CMOs are struggling with a lot of, hey, there's not a lot of net new channels. They're finding, decreased efficiency overall. Paid spend and ad budgets are down. And we've really kind of like, I know that this is an ongoing topic, but kind of killed outbound. Right place, right time, right message, thoughtful. With the kind of growth at all costs mentality, everyone staffed up on outbound sales. It was spray and pray. And now with AI sequencing, we've kind of gone completely off the rails. And I think
there's so much content
and terrible sequences, and just trying to create personalization. And what personalization means isn't like, pulling a LinkedIn post that talks about, a recent death in the family and then tying it into a sales motion.
Right. Yeah.
I think we're headed in that direction. And my hope is that we can kind of take it back to building relationships based on signals that may not be buying signals, but are the signals that surround you 24, that are happening 364 days a year, that are, things in market that the companies want to talk about, that are important to them and important to their customers. So kind of just the triangulation of a lot of things that I'm seeing on the marketing side that are just stuck and not being reinvented or rethought. And throughout my entire career, like I've always been at the helm of kind of thinking about disruption. And I just look at marketing, I'm like, we've been in the same place. We evolve in like small ways, and not to say that things aren't evolving on the technology side, but they're not going back to the one thing that I think AI can also replace, which is relationships. So trying to think about that and think about like, how do we talk to people, get people's perspectives, and eventually turn that into a relationship, which can eventually turn that into a buying motion.
Yeah, I was curious about that specifically, right? Because, with Outlever, there's a very interesting interplay of like, as you said, you get to control the narrative around, what your company does and the industry that it works in, right? But on the flip side of that, you're also in the process of creating content, you're able to build relationships. And for you, would you say they're of equal value, kind of like both of those areas, or is one really where you see the majority of the value coming from?
think they're of equal value. I mean, especially over time at scale. And I think it's really like, how do you, and they also play very well and work well together. So it's really kind of one motion that has two parts to it. That's how I would look at it.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how companies can go about some of the like thought leadership building without sacrificing on credibility, right? Because I think that there is a real risk as people try to get into positioning themselves as like an industry leader or something. If you do it poorly, I think it backfires, right? So how do you recommend companies kind of think about that?
Great question. I think the reality is companies love to and are very good at talking about themselves, but are less good at talking about the things that actually matter to the people that they might be speaking to, or their customers' daily, the daily things that their customers are dealing with. So I think the reality is they have to broaden the scope of what they're talking about. Often the conversations where with our own customers and people that we're speaking with, they get very stuck and go back to kind of product marketing language. I'm like, no, we need to broaden the horizon of what we're speaking about here. Like there are so many topics that really allow thought leadership to shine, because you're allowing those people to have a platform to speak to the things that matter to them. And it doesn't need to tie back to your company day one. It doesn't need to tie back to your company day two. It has to surround the larger industry and the trends that you're seeing in the industry. But I think the problem with thought leadership is it's often just so pulled back to us. It's about like, how do we talk about our company? And if you allow that to like loosen that thread just a little bit, you gain more authority, you build more credibility and trust, and you're able to speak to people that can really elevate themselves and talk about the things that matter to them. And you can learn a lot through listening. So that's sort of where I think thought leadership is headed, or should be headed. It should be more journalistic.
No, I really agree with that, because I think sometimes marketing, like I'll say this specifically within, the framework of like companies, especially founders, right? Like I think marketing can exist in their mind in this like completely separate entity, right? That there's like a totally different rule book of how to do it or what's acceptable within it. Where at the end of the day, people are still people. And to your point, like people feel good when they get to talk about themselves. People feel good when they are able to, feel like there's an interest in them, or, like if you're networking, right? There is a time and place for pitching to someone what you do, or mentioning it in some capacity. But if all you do is talk about yourself at like a meet and greet or something, it's awful, right? And like building a marketing strategy where like so many avenues of marketing are going to be, like it's an ad, right? Of course, you're going to talk about yourself in your ad, or it's an outbound campaign where there is a little bit less of an ability to like talk about whatever. There's still some of that, but it's going to be much more focused on the company itself, where thought leadership kind of lends itself towards a more expansive approach, I guess, right? Where it doesn't have to be quite as like company centric, and it allows you to draw in others by expanding the universe of what you're talking about.
That's what I think it should be. And I think marketers need to like have an understanding that that's the best use case of thought leadership. And also, it's really interesting when we're speaking to CEOs, CTOs, VPs on behalf of, publications that we run, and, getting them to talk about the things they care about. They'll speak for an hour. And what they're saying is very, very interesting, and actually lends itself to the creation of other new news stories, new content stories that are just as interesting, because they're giving you a wealth of information. So I think it's really like, let people talk about what they want to talk about, give them a platform, and then pull it back and see how it ties back to larger, more holistic trends. But, it needs a less of a tight rope. And I think that marketing is so like on a short leash that people don't allow, the definition of something to be a little bit looser than it's tied back to immediately. How does this speak to our company? And like, we have to get away from that, move a little bit away.
You touched on it a tiny bit right now of, like focus on topics that you can speak passionately about, that you want to talk about and stuff. But do you have any other guidelines for companies when they are trying to think through, like, where should we position ourselves when it comes to thought leadership? Like, what's the right thing to focus on, and what edges too closely to like, this is all about us?
Yeah. I think it's, what are the things that your product helps your customers do, and think about that in why they would be using you to begin with, and their landscape, and talk about that. I think it's really like, thinking about angles for every single thing. It's thinking about how the port strike affects automation and companies' logistics and all of that, and talking to them about that. Talking, with the CrowdStrike or cybersecurity, it's how does that affect like all of these companies that need to run every day? Like think about like from that angle, not just the security angle. I think there's just like extrapolating angles out a little bit further and thinking about like how it really affects the people that you want to be speaking to. I think like so often like thought leadership is like a case study or a guest post or like something that just isn't truly tied back to like subject matter expertise about something that's happening that's timely, and it kind of gets a little bit like lost. And I think like there's definitely elevation of like thought leaders, but LinkedIn's also taken on its own kind of like whole wave of thought leadership means. And I think like see that now happening in real time every day. And hopefully like the marketing world kind of, and I think they all, now thought leadership is such a top of mind thing. It's like, how do we talk about ourselves? How do we talk about the company? But really the value of, and even like, I'm extrapolating this now to LinkedIn, you don't want to talk about yourself every day. Like, if you're on to LinkedIn as a thought leader and you're an executive at a company and your narrative is what we're doing, what we're launching, this and this, unless you are like open AI, it's not going to work. You need to start talking about the things that people on LinkedIn care about, the things that can touch your customers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 touch points away. And that's how I view thought leadership in general. Like when you think about like the network effect of how do you reach a larger network because you're touching on things that they care about rather than things that you just talk about.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You're hitting on so many interesting points. How would you, like, as you're talking about all this, like, there's kind of light bulbs, right? Like, of course, there's value of this. And of course, there's like such a role to be played in like pursuing thought leadership as a long-term, more personal investment in your marketing. But, to your point, like CMOs are under a lot of pressure right now. How do you recommend people kind of be able to pitch this when there's dollars on the line?
I mean, it can be tied back to ROI. I think the reality, and there's a lot of different metrics that you can track in terms of like, is it working? Is it tying back to brand? Is it tying back to, relationships we're building? But the last thing you want to do is like build a thought leadership machine and platform and then turn it into a bait and switch sales motion.
Yeah.
And I think there's like just a delicacy in hopefully marketers understanding that this is the long-term value play of effectively like building brand, building relationships, where you meet someone for coffee and the business you're talking about your business, it should come up naturally and that relationship should be built over time. And talking like I want to go back to the basics of like how we communicate as people and how you would act in any sort of scenario where you're talking to someone and building a relationship with them. And that's how we should think about this. It should just be a little more human.
Yeah. Do you think part of the problem is sometimes people don't know how to do that anymore? Like, I think sometimes, especially in like the startup world, it's like it's like their entire universe, and then it like flows into marketing where they just kind of forget how to have like a normal interaction.
We've lost all humanity in marketing. It's so bizarre. It's like, I don't know what it is. If it's just like attribution has killed the idea that like marketing is inherently human. Like we're trying to touch on people's pain points, their emotions, their wants, their needs, right? Like it's all these very psychologically like human things that we're going to, but then like our approach to do them is just very robotic and not human. So
AI is not exactly helping with that. Like to your point, when you have like a cold email coming through that talks about like the recent loss of like, something that you like someone that you loved or something, it's like, this could not be worse.
I wish that was a joke. Like we said often, and it's just like, what are we doing here? Like, and that's being sold as personalization. And everyone's like, yes, personalization. Like say it in unison, personalization.
Right.
But really, we have to go back to it, like, let's have a conversation. Like, and it's not, I stalked your LinkedIn, I stalked your Instagram, and I saw that you went, the beach this weekend. How was that? Like, that's, you have to just go back
so
to
creepy.
Human. So I don't know. I'm trying to do that with what we're building here and really make it like, hey, we want to talk to you about the things that you care about, that matter to you, that you're passionate about. And let's build a relationship based on that. And let's elevate you and tell your story and tell the story of the things that are happening in the world that relate to you and your business and things that you care about.
Yeah, I would love to see that be a trend in 2025 as marketers just are able to kind of re-engage with the human side of people, buyers, companies, all of that. I do like, it does really make me think companies that figure out how to do that well are going to accelerate. Like their growth is going to, just shoot up and stuff. And I feel like people are going to be scratching their heads of like, well, what did they do? Right? Like, how can we replicate it? And in the process lose, like make it so formulaic that once again, it,
yeah. I mean,
degrades.
I would agree. I see two sides of it. I see marketers that we speak to that get it immediately. They're like, the light bulb goes off and they're like, yes. And then I see others that are like, well, why doesn't this speak to marketing automation more? Why aren't we just talking about marketing automation? It's like, no. Like we have to talk about the entire scope of what's happening to be able to like really capture like what we want to speak to. Like otherwise just create a blog. And I think, that's also a really good point. Like we need to differentiate what thought leadership is from blog content. There's such a different motion and a different, vehicle and a different execution style of what you need to be doing and thought process that we can't conflate thought leadership in our blog. And I think that's just an important kind of,
two separate things.
Yeah.
I'm curious because I remember that you referred to yourself as like a disruptor early in this conversation. And I am thinking to myself, like how with alternative forms of strategy, like the ones that Outlever are focused on, right? Like how much can that take off before it maybe degrades? And like, not just with you guys, but anything, right? Like, is there kind of like a little bit of like, you have to get in early and marketers need to always be thinking about like, how can I disrupt what is the norm, right? Like, how can I cut through the noise and do something a little bit different? Not necessarily, throwing away everything that's been done, but like how much on the cutting edge do you need to be and disrupting what is done and how it's usually done in order to be effective?
In marketing, like as a leader, I mean, I think that's like a mindset that all successful marketers and leaders that are successful have. They're constantly looking for, okay, these things are working, but how do I disrupt? What's new? They actually like effectively, I was thinking about this the other day, they kind of act like A&R agents within their own companies. They're demos, they're learning about the newest technology, they're seeing what makes sense, they're constantly being fed ideas, and then they're tabling the ones that don't make sense and kind of moving forward with the test the ones that do. And I mean, I think that's the only way forward. Like things are moving very quickly, but also there's not a lot of net new ways to market. Like there's just not. And I think it's all about like finding those side things that out of make you differentiated. And to your other point, do I think you have to get in early? I think it depends. I think like if you're too late, you're too late. Like, but I think there's like the world is big. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that affects every aspect of business and technology and the things that we're all building and focused on. And I think that there's enough content and news to go around. So if you are able to like stake your kind of claim on certain aspects of it, sure, you might win there, but there's so much to talk about in so many different ways. And also, our whole thing is when you talk to someone, talk to you, talk to someone else, like perspectives shift dramatically based on who you speak to. Everyone has different opinions, which I think allows us to go very, very like broad in terms of like one topic, speaking to 10 different people turns into 10 different stories based on their perspectives. That like other people either resonate with or they or they don't resonate with. But I think as long as people have opinions and news is happening and things are happening in the world, like it's pretty large. The TAM of this motion is.
I'd love to hear your thoughts too on like when is the right time for a company to pursue like less traditional forms of marketing, specifically in the realm of like thought leadership, right? Like when should they be focused on just like very clearly, company directed marketing versus like what's the right time to lay the strategy for like long term?
I mean, I would say with a net new strategy, like it's kind of interesting because this motion in a way does a lot of things that you would not expect it to do. The one thing is when you're talking to people in your customer set, you're effectively performing customer interviews, prospect interviews without it being a sales call. So you're learning a lot of things that are very valuable in any stage of a company. So we work with a few seed companies that are spending like their entire marketing budget with us because they are it's allowing them to figure out product market fit and figure out ICP. So I think it's really, conversations can actually help you shape your entire go-to-market strategy versus like coming in later and, developing and honing in on it and having, so I think it kind of just depends on what you're looking to do and where you are in the stage, but it can actually, you're talking to people, right? Like, I think that's valuable at any stage of a company, and I think building brand. I mean, I'm a very big proponent of like building brand from day one, and I think that's very important. So, I mean, I think it kind of depends on your I don't want to say risk averse. Like I would just say like how bullish you are on like motion helping to shape a lot of the things that you actually do. Can it help you get early, build early relationships and get early leads? Can it help you shape, your identity of your ICP, if you're seed stage? Can it help you, build your sales motion, build your motion? So.
Yeah, I love what you said about like, the interviews that you're able to conduct, right? Being valuable, not even just from like a marketing standpoint, or as in like trying to sell to those people or something, but like the customer insight, the like honing in on your ICP, like that's I feel like marketers need to be able to do that, right? Like kind of milk value from every stage. And the most successful strategies are going to be the ones where you can find that value, because the more it's automated, right? Like, is it going to accomplish something? Sure, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it's a very like, I don't know, not binary, but it's very like you do this and then you reap this benefit. Whereas like a more long-term strategy, a more human strategy, to some points, like a more labor-intensive strategy, right? Like if you're able to conduct or to extract value from every step of that process or something, like it becomes a much more holistic, I don't know if that would be the right way to describe it, but it becomes a much more like holistic endeavor for the company.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think it's like, it really, even us building and learning and talking to people has been so valuable. Like, I'm like, the value is here. The value is in having these conversations. The value is in letting people speak, period. Like, I think that's where our industry needs to trend a little bit more. It's like letting our customers and our prospects and people within the industry talk a little bit more openly about things they care about. You're going to extract so much value at every stage.
I wonder if that too is going to become even more valuable, just because like, we've already mentioned it, but there is such an like oversaturation of content in the market right now. There's an oversaturation of like ads, messaging coming in through inboxes, like all of that kind of stuff. And anything that allows people to speak instead of being spoken to, I think there's something special in that feels differentiated compared to the average day-to-day experience right now.
I mean, people tell you this. Like, I think if we also just stopped and we listened a little bit more than we spoke, we'd hear it from our customers. We'd hear it from like, everyone in the industry. They're tired of just being like spoken to and yelled at, all the time. Like, buy my product, like with no value, or read this white paper, download this gated white paper, like come to this webinar. Like, I think we just need to like allow people to talk a little bit more rather than try to speak to them. And I think that's been the whole, I guess, strategy in marketing forever. It's yell at people loudly. And I think maybe we should take a look in the mirror and think about, reframing that and rethinking that entire.
I love that. Well, this has been an extremely enjoyable conversation, Melissa. As we kind of close up, any parting thoughts or anything else, I guess you wanted to touch on that we haven't yet?
Yeah. I mean, I would just say like throughout my entire career, I've always kind of gone into things thinking that nothing was impossible, and that at any given point in time, something could be completely rethought. And usually around when something needs to be rethought, it's because there's a ton of saturation and there's just going to be no winning at scale in certain areas. So my parting thought is, think about everything that you're doing and try to rethink it, in a small ways and big ways, but how do you do it differently? If everyone is doing the same thing, we're a sea of sameness and nothing is going to break through. So take small pieces at a time and rethink them and do that daily, and that'll compound.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa. It was great getting to talk today. And thank you for anyone who's watching live. I see we got a hand wave from Sushami in the comment section. So hello. We are here every Thursday at 12:30 Eastern, typically with the Growth Accelerator, bringing on industry experts to talk about anything related to beat growth. If you ever have any ideas on topics that you would like to see us talk about, let us know. We would be more than happy to bring that into the mix. But again, Melissa, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be back again next week.
Thank you.